The Osprey's rotors beat a frantic rhythm against the thin, glacial air, a sound of pure violence in the otherwise profound silence of the mountain range. Below, forward operating base Black Ridge clung to the side of a granite cliff like a desperate lichen. It was a place of hard edges and harder men, a lonely outpost at the sharp end of the world. Specialist Anya Sharma felt the vibration through the metal floor, her gaze fixed on the grim tableau of rock and ice sliding past the window. Her uniform was too clean, the digital camouflage pattern still crisp, the rank insignia on her collar, a single chevron and a rocker factory fresh. She was the only passenger on the final leg of the journey, a data analyst dispatched from a climate-controlled intelligence hub to this frostbitten purgatory. The crew chief gave her a thumbs up, his face obscured by a helmet visor. Sharma nodded, shifting the weight of her pack. It was lighter than the rucksacks of the infantrymen who populated this place, filled not with ammunition and explosives, but with encrypted hard drives, satellite signal analyzers, and advanced meteorological sensors. The Osprey settled onto the icy landing pad with a final, shuddering groan. The rear ramp lowered, unleashing a blast of wind so cold it felt like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. Sharma descended into the maelstrom, her boots finding purchase on the grated metal. Waiting for her was a man who seemed carved from the same granite as the surrounding peaks. He was a sergeant first class, his rank stark against the faded, salt-stained fabric of his uniform. His face was a roadmap of harsh campaigns, skin weathered to leather, a jagged scar tracing a white line from his temple to his jaw. He stood with his arms crossed, a posture of innate, unshakable authority. His name, according to her manifest, was Thorn. His eyes, the color of chips of slate, raked over her from head to toe. They lingered on her pristine uniform, her specialist rank, and the signal's corps insignia on her lapel. A slow, contemptuous smirk pulled at the corner of his mouth. "They sent me a specialist?" His voice was a low growl, barely audible over the whining down of the Osprey's engines. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "A data pud? Here." He spat a brown stream of tobacco juice onto the ice, where it froze almost instantly. Two younger soldiers, a corporal and a private, flanked him, mimicking his dismissive posture. They snickered, sharing a look that confirmed their sergeant's assessment. Sharma said nothing. She squared her shoulders and met his gaze directly. Her own eyes, a dark, calm brown, held no challenge, no fear, no emotion at all. They were simply observant, cataloging him the way she would a dataset. SFC Thorn, Rex. Platoon Sergeant, Alpha Company. 17 years service. Multiple combat deployments. Commendations for valor. Noted for aggressive, frontline leadership. Prone to dismissing support personnel. The file had been thorough. Specialist Sharma, reporting as ordered, Sergeant, she said, her voice even and clear, unbothered by the cold or his hostility. Thorn grunted, unimpressed. He gestured vaguely toward the collection of prefabricated huts that constituted the FOB. "Command tent. Drop your gear. Then report to the supply depot. Corporal Mendez needs a hand counting sandbags. Seems about your speed." The insult was deliberate, a clear message. You are not a soldier. You are cargo. You are a clerk sent to the wrong address. The two junior soldiers couldn't contain their grins. "Yes, Sergeant," Sharma replied, the words clipped and precise. She walked past him without another glance, her stride measured and economical. She didn't react to the cold, didn't shrink from the wind. She simply moved toward the command tent, a small, solitary figure against a vast, indifferent landscape. Thorn watched her go, the smirk hardening into a scowl. He had seen her type before. Fresh-faced analysts and technicians sent from the rear, full of theories and algorithms, useless when the wind howled and the steel flew. They didn't last. This one, he decided, would be no different. She was just another piece of fragile equipment sent to a place that broke things for a living. The mountains didn't care about spreadsheets. Inside the cramped supply depot, the air was thick with the smell of canvas, grease, and stale coffee. Corporal Mendez, a wiry man with nervous energy, pointed her to a mountain of burlap sacks in the corner. "Sergeant's orders. Full count. Then stack 'em by the west wall." Neatly, he said the last word with a pointed look, as if expecting her to be incapable of even that. Sharma set her pack down carefully and began. She didn't sigh or complain. She worked with a quiet, methodical efficiency that was almost unnerving. She didn't just count. She inspected each bag for rot or damage, sorting them into piles. Her movements were fluid, wasting no energy. Mendez watched for a few minutes, expecting to see the clumsiness of someone unaccustomed to physical labor. Instead, he saw a disquieting precision. She handled the heavy, awkward bags as if they were delicate instruments. After a while, he grew bored and left her to the mindless task. For the next 3 hours, Specialist Sharma counted sandbags while the wind howled a mournful song outside, a lonely sentinel in a world that had already dismissed her. The dismissal continued, a low-grade infection in the FOB's daily routine. Sergeant Thorne made it his personal mission to remind Sharma of her perceived station. He assigned her the worst duties: cleaning the latrines, burning waste in the incinerator pit, sorting spent brass casings in the freezing motor pool. Each order was delivered with a sneer, a public performance for the benefit of his men, who quickly adopted his attitude. They called her the Ghost, not out of respect for any stealthy ability, but because she was so quiet and unobtrusive. She would appear, perform her assigned task with that same unnerving efficiency, and disappear back into the small cot she'd been given in a storage annex. She never complained, never argued, never even changed her placid expression. Her silence seemed to infuriate Thorne more than any protest could have. It was as if his contempt was a physical force that simply flowed around her, unable to find purchase. In the mess hall, she ate alone. The long tables were filled with the boisterous camaraderie of Thorne's platoon, their laughter and crude jokes echoing off the metal walls. If she sat at the end of a table, they would pointedly get up and move, leaving her in a small bubble of isolation. She would continue eating, her focus on her tray, seemingly oblivious. But she was never oblivious. She was listening. She heard them talk about patrol routes, about the strange magnetic interference that played havoc with their compasses near the northern ridge, about the way the snowpack was shifting on the eastern face. She absorbed it all, filing it away in a mental architecture far more complex than anyone suspected. One afternoon, in the makeshift briefing room, Thorne was outlining a reconnaissance patrol. He used a grease pencil to draw a thick, confident line on a transparent overlay of a topographical map. Alpha Team will move along the Dragon's Tooth Ridge, set up an OP here, and monitor the valley pass for any movement. Standard in and out, 48 hours. Sharma was present, tasked with collating the post-mission data. She stood silently in the back corner of the room. As Thorne finished his briefing, she spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the murmur of the soldiers. "Sergeant." Thorne turned, his irritation plain. "What is it, Specialist?" She stepped forward, pointing to a specific section of the map he had marked. "That route crosses 3 separate alluvial fans. Given the recent temperature fluctuations and the projected snowfall, the avalanche risk is over 70%. The room went silent. The soldiers stared, first at her, then at Thorne. The sergeant's face darkened, a slow flush of anger creeping up his neck. "Is that so?" he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Did your weather app tell you that?" "No, Sergeant," Sharma replied calmly. "The U.S. Geological Survey's alpine instability charts for this specific quadrant, cross-referenced with the last 72 hours of barometric pressure and thermal data from UAV overflights, told me that. The cohesive strength of the surface hoar is degrading rapidly." She spoke in a monotone, a simple statement of fact. But to Thorne, it was an open challenge to his authority, delivered in a language of science and data he neither understood nor respected. He saw it as an attack on his experience, his gut feelings, the things that had kept him and his men alive for years. He stepped closer, looming over her. He was a good foot taller, broader, a physical embodiment of the infantryman's world. She didn't flinch. "I've been walking these mountains since before you were born, specialist," he snarled. "I know how to read the snow. We stick to the plan. You stick to your computers." He turned his back on her, a gesture of finality. "Dismissed." The soldiers shuffled out, some of them casting curious, almost pitying glances at Sharma. She had crossed a line. She had tried to use her world of numbers to tell a wolf about his own forest. It was a mistake they were sure she would pay for. Sharma simply returned to her corner, her expression unreadable. She had provided the data. The decision was his. The consequences, too. The next day, Thorne doubled down on her menial tasks. He had her scrubbing the grease traps in the mess hall kitchen, a foul, disgusting job reserved for the rawest of privates. He wanted to break her, to force a reaction, to see a crack in that serene, infuriating composure. He wanted her to understand her place. As she worked, her hands covered in grime, two of his men, Corporal Diaz and PFC Evans, lounged nearby, cleaning their rifles. "Hey, Ghost," Diaz called out, a mocking lilt in his voice. "You figure out the avalanche risk for that grease trap." Evans chuckled. "Careful, Diaz. She might cross-reference you with the latrine duty roster." Sharma didn't respond. She just kept working, her movements precise even in the filth. She disassembled the traps filter, cleaning each component with a rag, her focus absolute. "What's it like back in the real world?" Evans asked, his tone shifting to one of feigned curiosity. "You guys get, like, catered lunches at your big data centers? Sit around in your air-conditioned offices playing with satellites?" "Leave her be," Diaz said, though he was smiling. "She's concentrating, probably calculating the molecular density of that sludge." The truth was, her mind was miles away. She was running simulations not on grease, but on the patrol. She was factoring in Thorne's likely pace, the wind speed, the subtle drop in temperature she'd noted that morning. She was building a predictive model of failure, and the probability percentages were climbing with every passing hour. Her hands were busy with the grime of the present, but her mind was already deep in the crisis of the future. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the mountain air, that Thorne's pride was leading his men into a place from which experience alone might not be able to retrieve them. And no one was listening. The crisis did not arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in like the fog that so often shrouded the high peaks, a slow, insidious thief of certainty. It began with the convoy. A routine resupply run of fuel, ammunition, and medical essentials was 3 days overdue. At first, it was a minor annoyance. Delays were common in this terrain. But then came the storm. It wasn't a normal mountain squall. This was a meteorological monster, a white wolf, as the locals called it. It descended from the northern plateau without warning, a swirling, suffocating mass of snow and wind. Visibility dropped to 0. The temperature plummeted to 30 below, then 40. The wind shrieked like a banshee, a physical force that hammered at the thin walls of the FOB and piled snow in drifts that buried entire structures. All communication died. First the high-frequency radio, then the satellite uplink. The FOB was an island, deaf and mute in a sea of white. The silence on the airwaves was more terrifying than the howling of the wind. They were utterly, completely alone. The FOB's main generator, a thirsty beast that powered their heaters, lights, and electronic systems, began to sputter. The fuel from the overdue convoy was now a matter of survival. The last reserve tank was running low. Sergeant Thorne stood in the command tent, the dim emergency lights casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, making his weathered face look like a skull. The confidence he normally wore like armor was beginning to crack. His world was one of direct action, of facing a tangible enemy. This was different. He couldn't shoot the storm. He couldn't intimidate the cold. His patrol, the one he had sent up the Dragon's Tooth Ridge against Sharma's warning, was also missing. They were supposed to have checked in 2 days ago, before the storm hit. Now they were somewhere out in that maelstrom. The FOB's small medical station ran on a backup battery, but the medic, a young specialist named Cohen, reported to Thorne with a grim look on his face. "Sergeant, we're down to our last 2 units of plasma. We have no broad-spectrum antibiotics left. If we get any serious trauma cases, we're in trouble." The men felt the tension. The usual banter in the mess hall was replaced by a heavy silence. They cleaned their weapons, checked their gear, waiting for orders for a plan. They looked to Thorn, their rock, their leader. And Thorn, for the first time in a long time, felt the crushing weight of their expectations. He made a decision the only way he knew how, with aggression. "We're not going to sit here and freeze to death," he announced to the assembled soldiers in the command tent. His voice was a forced roar, trying to project a certainty he didn't feel. "The convoy is probably hunkered down at the Taggart Pass, waiting out the storm. We'll send a 2-man team. Follow the main supply route. Find them, get a fuel bladder, and bring it back." It was a desperate plan, bordering on suicidal. The main supply route was a wide, exposed road, now buried under 10 feet of snow and directly in the path of the storm's worst winds. Navigating it in zero visibility would be nearly impossible. From the back of the tent, Sharma spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried an authority that made several of the men turn to look. "That won't work, Sergeant." Thorn's head snapped around. His face, already strained, contorted with fury. "Are you questioning my orders again, Specialist?" "I am presenting a more viable alternative," she said, stepping forward into the lantern light. She was holding a tablet, its screen glowing with a complex overlay of maps and weather data she had somehow downloaded before the main comms went down. "The main route is a wind tunnel. The wind chill factor out there is approaching -90. Survival time, even with full Arctic gear, would be less than an hour. Furthermore, the magnetic interference from the storm's electrical charge will render your compasses useless, and the GPS satellites are currently out of alignment for this hemisphere." She pointed to the screen. "The convoy isn't at Taggart Pass. The last passive signal I picked up from their transponder before the storm hit placed them here." She indicated a small, sheltered box canyon 3 kilometers southwest of the pass. "They likely took refuge there. Standard operating procedure for this region in the event of a whiteout." Thorn stared at her, his fists clenching and unclenching. "And I suppose you have a magical way to get there?" "Not magical. Logical," she replied, her tone unvaried. "The main route is deadly. But there is another way." She zoomed in on the topographical map. A faint, almost invisible line snaked through a series of deep ravines and along the lee side of a secondary ridge. "This is an old goatherd's trail. It's not on any of our standard military maps. It is completely shielded from the northwesterly wind. The path is narrow and treacherous, but it's navigable. It will be slow going, but it's possible." Corporal next to Thorn scoffed. "A goat trail? In this storm? That's insane." "Insanity," Sharma said, looking directly at Thorn, "is sending men to die on an exposed road based on a gut feeling. I have data. The probability of success for my proposed route is 28%. The probability of success for yours is 0". The blunt, cold mathematics of her statement hung in the air. For Thorn, it was the ultimate insult. This clerk, this ghost, was not only questioning his command but was doing so with an arrogant certainty that drove him to the edge. "I am in command here, Specialist," he growled, his voice low and shaking with rage. "And I say we go up the main road. Diaz, Evans, gear up. You're leaving in 10". The 2 soldiers nodded, their faces grim. They knew the odds, but they followed orders. As they turned to leave, Sharma's voice stopped them. "Sergeant," she said, her voice dropping the last vestiges of subordinate deference. It was now the voice of an expert stating an undeniable conclusion. "You are sending them to their deaths. I will not be a party to it." Thorn took a step toward her, his face a mask of fury. "That is the last time you will speak to me like that. You are on latrine duty until you rot. Now get out of my sight." Sharma held his gaze for a long moment. Then, with a quiet sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his ignorance, she turned and walked out of the tent, disappearing into the swirling snow. Thorn watched her go, a bitter taste in his mouth. He had won the confrontation. He had asserted his authority. But as the wind screamed outside, a cold seed of doubt began to sprout in the pit of his stomach. It felt less like a victory and more like he had just signed 2 death warrants. The action began not with a bang, but with a crackle of static. 3 hours after Diaz and Evans had ventured into the white hell, a garbled, panicked transmission burst from the command tent's radio. Black Ridge, this is Alpha. Visibility 0. Evans is down. Leg. Can't. Repeat, we are lost. The transmission cut out, replaced by the howling static of the storm. The blood drained from Thorne's face. He grabbed the microphone, shouting their names, but only the hiss of the dead air answered. He had sent them out, and the storm had swallowed them. The weight of his decision crashed down on him, a physical, suffocating force. His gut, his experience, it had all been wrong. And the analyst, the ghost, had been right. The tent flap flew open and Sharma stepped inside, a gust of wind and snow swirling in with her. She was no longer dressed in a standard-issue uniform. She wore advanced, multi-layered cold-weather gear, the kind issued to Special Operations Mountain Warfare units. A climbing harness was strapped around her waist, carabiners and ice screws clinking softly. On her back was a specialized pack, and in her hands, she held a compact, high-powered thermal imager she had requisitioned from the drone maintenance bay. She didn't look at Thorne. She addressed the remaining soldiers in the tent, her voice devoid of panic, radiating a chilling, absolute competence. Corporal Mendez, I need you and Private Chun. You are the 2 fittest men here with any cold weather experience. Gear up. Full Arctic loadout, climbing ropes, and medical kits. We have a rescue operation to mount. Mendez and Chun, who had been looking at Thorne for direction, now found their eyes locked on Sharma. Her transformation was so complete, so sudden, that it short-circuited the normal chain of command. This was not the quiet, awkward specialist who counted sandbags. This was someone else entirely. Thorne found his voice, a weak, strangled thing. What do you think you're doing, specialist? Sharma finally turned to face him. Her calm, brown eyes were now like chips of obsidian. There was no "I told you so," no trace of vindication. There was only the mission. I am saving your men, Sergeant, she said, her voice flat. You can either help me or you can get out of my way. The choice is yours, but I am leaving in 5 minutes, with or without you. She turned her back on him and began issuing a rapid-fire series of precise instructions to Mendez and Chun. Check the battery packs on your radios. Set them to frequency channel 7, narrowband. It'll have the best chance of cutting through the interference. Mendez, your primary role is carrying the supplemental medical gear. Chun, you carry the emergency shelter and rations. I'll take point and navigate. Thorne was frozen, a statue of obsolete authority. His entire world had been upended. The woman he had mocked, the clerk he had relegated to the most demeaning tasks, was now commanding his NCOs with an expertise that surpassed his own. He watched as Mendez and Chen, without a moment's hesitation, scrambled to follow her orders. They recognized real leadership when they saw it, and it had nothing to do with the rank on one's collar. Swallowing his pride, a bitter pill, Thorne moved. I'm going with you. Sharma glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Can you keep up? The question was not an insult. It was a simple, practical query. He nodded, his jaw tight. Just tell me what to do. Get your gear, she said, and turned back to her preparations. Outside, the storm was a living entity of pure chaos. The wind drove ice crystals like tiny needles into any exposed skin. It was impossible to see more than a few feet. To venture into this was suicide. Yet Sharma moved with a purpose that defied the elements. She didn't head for the main gate. Instead, she led them to a narrow gap in the FOB's western perimeter fence, a section that opened onto the treacherous, winding path she had identified on the map. The goat trail. Tether up, she ordered, pulling a coil of high-tensile rope from her pack. Single file, 10-meter intervals. I lead. Thorne, you take the rear. Watch our back trail. It'll be gone in seconds, but watch it anyway. She clipped herself in and, without another word, stepped out into the blizzard. She held the thermal imager in one hand, its screen a ghostly palette of blues and greens. She wasn't looking at the screen for people. She was using it to read the terrain, to distinguish between solid rock, deep snowdrifts, and thin ice shelves. She moved slowly but steadily, her feet finding purchase where it seemed none could exist. She was reading the mountain not with maps or data now, but with an innate, primal sense of the landscape. For hours they fought their way through the storm. It was a brutal, soul-crushing ordeal. The wind was a constant, physical pressure, trying to tear them from the mountainside. The cold was a living thing, seeping through their layers of gear, leaching the strength from their limbs. Thorn, a man who prided himself on his physical endurance, found himself struggling to keep pace. He watched the small figure of Sharma ahead of him, a phantom in the swirling snow, and felt a dawning sense of awe. She never hesitated, never stumbled. She moved like she was born to this. She would stop periodically, holding up a hand, and they would huddle behind a rock outcropping while she studied the imager and the terrain. She was navigating by the feel of the wind on her face, by the subtle shifts in the slope beneath her feet. This wasn't science. It was an art, a deadly form of it. Finally, she stopped, holding up a clenched fist. "They're close," she yelled over the wind. "The imager is picking up 2 heat signatures. 200 meters ahead, in a rockfall." Hope, sharp and painful, surged through Thorn. They pushed forward, their movements clumsy with exhaustion and cold. They found them huddled at the base of a small cliff, half buried in a snowdrift. Evans was conscious but in agony, his leg bent at an unnatural angle, a compound fracture. Diaz was semi-conscious, his words slurred, his body shivering violently. He was in the advanced stages of hypothermia. Sharma was instantly in command of the medical situation. "Mendez, the ISO blanket and heat packs. Wrap Diaz now. Chun, get the emergency shelter up. We need to get them out of the wind. Sergeant, help me with Evan's leg." Working with deft, practiced hands, she cut away Evan's trouser leg. The sight of the bone protruding from the skin would have made many seasoned soldiers flinch. Sharma didn't react. She immediately began preparing a field splint, her movements economical and sure. Thorn found himself taking orders from her without a second thought. His own considerable field medical experience feeling clumsy and slow next to her precision. She was in her element, a surgeon in a hurricane. They were her instruments. The crisis reached its apex inside the flimsy, flapping emergency shelter. They had managed to get both injured men inside, out of the direct assault of the wind, but their conditions were deteriorating. Diaz's shivering had stopped, a terrifying sign that his body was giving up its fight for warmth. Evans was drifting in and out of shock from the pain. "We need a medevac, but they'll never fly in this," Mendez stated the obvious, his voice tight with despair. "We don't need a medevac," Sharma said, her focus on Diaz. "We need a direct consult with a trauma surgeon. The comms are out, but I might be able to punch a signal through." From her pack, she pulled a device Thorn had never seen before. It was a compact, ruggedized satellite transceiver with a small, foldable directional antenna. "This is an emergency burst transmitter. It sends a highly compressed data packet on a dedicated military frequency. It's short range, but if I can bounce it off the ionospheric ducting caused by the storm's static field, I might be able to hit a command relay satellite." It was a language none of them understood. It sounded like science fiction. She worked quickly, connecting the device to her tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as she input a series of complex codes. "This is a one-shot deal," she muttered, more to herself than to them. "The battery will only last for a single transmission." She angled the antenna, making minute adjustments, her eyes darting between her tablet and the flimsy wall of the shelter, as if she could see the invisible signals in the air. Then she pressed a key. A low hum emanated from the device, and a single green light blinked on, then held steady. "I have a link," she said, a hint of relief in her voice. "It's weak. Audio only." She put on a headset. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is an unlisted call sign at FOB Black Ridge. Requesting immediate medical patch-through to Joint Task Force Command. A voice, distorted by static, came through the headset's small speaker. It was sharp, authoritative, and laced with urgency. Unidentified station, you are on a restricted channel. Identify yourself immediately. This is Specialist Anya Sharma, requesting medical consult for 2 critical casualties, she said, her voice remaining level. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of crackling silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity. The voice that came back was different. The anger was gone, replaced by disbelief and a sudden, profound shift in tone. Anya? My God. Is that you? The voice was that of an older man, a voice accustomed to commanding armies. We lost contact with your observation mission 3 weeks ago. We thought, Colonel Sharma, what is your status? What the hell is going on at Black Ridge? The word hung in the freezing, claustrophobic air of the shelter. Colonel. Thorne stared, his mind refusing to process the sound. He looked at the woman kneeling in the snow, her face illuminated by the glow of a tablet screen as she calmly relayed medical information. The quiet specialist, the ghost, the datapud he had sent to count sandbags and clean latrines. Mendez and Chen exchanged a look of pure, unadulterated shock. Their mouths hung open. They looked from Sharma back to the specialist insignia on her sleeve, a symbol that was now revealed as the most elaborate, effective piece of camouflage they had ever witnessed. Sharma didn't even seem to register the general's use of her rank. Her focus was absolute. General Peterson, my status is irrelevant. I have 1 soldier with a compound fracture of the tibia and fibula, showing signs of shock. A second is suffering from severe hypothermia, core temperature estimated at 30 degrees Celsius. He is non-responsive. I need a trauma surgeon on this channel now. The general's voice, now stripped of all pretense, was immediate. Patching you through, Colonel. Hold the line. For the next 20 minutes, Sharma became a conduit for a surgeon thousands of miles away. She relayed vital signs, described symptoms with clinical precision, and executed complex medical procedures based on the surgeon's instructions. She guided Thorne and Mendez through setting Evan's leg, a gruesome, painful process. She directed them in the delicate art of slowly, carefully rewarming Diaz, preventing the fatal shock that could come from doing it too quickly. Through it all, Thorne worked in a daze. He followed her orders, his hands moving automatically while his mind reeled. Colonel, a full-bird colonel, a rank that put her in command of entire brigades, a rank he, a sergeant first class, might never even speak to in his entire career. He had mocked her. He had belittled her. He had sent her to scrub grease traps. The humiliation was a cold, sick feeling in his gut, far worse than the biting wind outside. He wasn't just wrong. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. She was undercover, an observer. What she was doing at Black Ridge, masquerading as a low-ranking specialist, he couldn't begin to fathom. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He had committed the single greatest error of his professional life. He had mistaken a lioness for a lamb, and she had just saved his men from a disaster of his own making. The journey back was an epic of silent, brutal effort. Diaz and Evans were stabilized but immobile, lashed to improvised stretchers. The storm still raged, but its fury seemed to have lessened slightly, as if the mountain itself was awed by the events that had transpired. The return trip was a slow, grueling procession, each step a victory against the cold and exhaustion. The dynamic of the small group had irrevocably shifted. There was no question of who was in command. Sharma led, breaking the trail, her small frame a bulwark against the wind. Thorne, Mendez, and Chen followed without a word, their obedience now born not of rank or regulation, but of a profound, undeniable respect. Thorne took the heaviest burden, placing himself at the rear of Evan's stretcher, using his larger frame to shield the injured man. Every time they paused, he would look ahead at Sharma. He watched the way she moved, the way she constantly scanned the terrain, the quiet confidence in her posture. He was seeing her for the first time. The clean uniform, the quiet demeanor. It wasn't weakness or inexperience. It was control. It was the discipline of a senior officer who had no need for the bluster and swagger of a platoon sergeant. She didn't need to shout to command a room. Her presence was enough. When they finally staggered back through the perimeter fence of FOB Black Ridge, they were met by the anxious faces of the remaining soldiers. The sight of the rescue party, with both missing men alive, sent a wave of relief through the small garrison. The news of what had happened, and who Sharma really was, spread not through an official announcement, but through the hushed, awestruck whispers of Mendez and Chun. It moved through the FOB like a shockwave, rewriting every interaction, every sneer, every dismissive glance of the past week. The soldiers who had mocked the ghost now avoided her gaze, their faces a mixture of shame and awe. Sharma, for her part, seemed unchanged. After ensuring Diaz and Evans were safely in the care of the medic, she disappeared. She didn't seek out Thorne, didn't make a report, didn't lord her true rank over anyone. She simply vanished back into the quiet anonymity she had cultivated. Thorne found her an hour later in the command tent. She was sitting at a communications console, her fingers flying across a keyboard, working to restore the FOB's satellite link. She was wearing a standard-issue fleece, the specialist rank on her collar still in place. Thorne stopped a few feet away. He had cleaned himself up, his face scrubbed raw, his uniform as neat as he could make it. He stood at the position of attention, his body rigid, his hands at his sides. She didn't look up from her screen. "Is there something you need, Sergeant?" The word sergeant was not an insult. It was a simple statement of fact, a recognition of his rank, but in the context of what he now knew, it felt like a judgment. He cleared his throat. The apology he had rehearsed in his head, the excuses, the explanations, they all felt hollow and inadequate. Words were meaningless. Only an action could suffice. "Ma'am," he said, his voice raspy. She stopped typing. Slowly, she turned in her chair to face him. Her expression was neutral, waiting. Thorne's training, 17 years of it, took over. He brought his right hand up in a salute. It was the sharpest, most precise salute of his life. His arm was a straight line, his fingers perfectly aligned, his eyes locked forward. It was more than a gesture of courtesy. It was an act of surrender. It was an admission of his failure, a recognition of her authority, and an unspoken apology, all rendered in a single, silent movement. She looked at him, her dark eyes holding his for a long moment. She didn't smile. She didn't admonish him. She simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Then, she returned the salute with a matching, crisp formality. It was an acknowledgement, an acceptance, a closing of the chapter. "As you were, Sergeant," she said quietly. He dropped his hand, but remained at attention. "Ma'am, your orders." "My orders," she said, turning back to the console, "are for you to ensure the generator is refueled the moment the convoy arrives. See to the welfare of your men, and get some rest. You've earned it." It was a dismissal, but it was the dismissal of a commanding officer, not a contemptuous peer. It was a restoration of the proper order of things. "Yes, ma'am," Thorne said. He executed a perfect about-face and walked out of the tent, his back straight, his mind reeling. The world was back on its axis, but he was a changed man standing on it. The storm broke with the dawn. The wind died down, and the rising sun cast a brilliant, cleansing light across the snow-covered mountains. The sky was a piercing, impossible blue. The world felt new, scrubbed clean. The arrival of the rescued convoy from the Box Canyon, following the tracks Sharma's team had left, was almost an anticlimax. Specialist Anya Sharma, or rather Colonel Anya Sharma, was not in the command tent overseeing the flurry of activity. She was not in the mess hall, where the soldiers now spoke her name in hushed, reverent tones. She was standing alone on a small observation platform at the edge of the FOB, looking out at the vast, silent peaks. She was methodically field stripping and cleaning her service rifle, the one she had carried on the rescue mission. Her movements were familiar and practiced, the rhythmic slide and click of metal components a form of meditation. The weapon was a tool and she cared for her tools. In this simple, soldierly act, she was no different from any private in the garrison. The rank, the secret mission, the intellectual prowess, all of it fell away, leaving only the core reality. She was a soldier. The mountains and the mission were all that mattered. Footsteps crunched in the snow behind her. She didn't turn. She knew who it was from the heavy, deliberate tread. Sergeant Thorne came to a stop beside her. He wasn't swaggering. His usual air of command had been replaced by a quiet, watchful humility. He held 2 steaming metal mugs in his hands. He extended one to her. "Coffee, ma'am," he said. His voice was low, respectful. She finished reassembling the rifle's bolt carrier group, wiping a spot of oil from her thumb before taking the mug. The warmth seeped into her cold fingers. She took a sip, her eyes still on the horizon. The coffee was black and strong, just the way she liked it. She wondered, for a fleeting moment, how he knew. Then she realized he had probably made it his business to find out. It was a small detail, but it was significant. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the sunlight creep down the mountain faces. The shared silence was not awkward. It was a space of understanding, filled with the unspoken events of the past 24 hours. Finally, Thorne spoke, his gaze fixed on the dragon's tooth ridge, the site of his near-fatal mistake. "That was a hell of a thing you did, ma'am." "We did it, Sergeant," she corrected him softly, without looking at him. "You pulled your weight." It was the highest praise she could offer, and they both knew it. "Why?" Thorne asked the question raw. "Why the disguise? A specialist." Sharma took another sip of coffee, considering her answer. "Sometimes, to get an accurate reading of a situation, you have to change the way you measure it. You can learn more by listening from the floor than you can by shouting from the podium." She finally turned her head, her dark eyes meeting his. "You run a good platoon, Sergeant Thorne. They're loyal. They're tough. But you rely too much on what you think you know, and not enough on what you don't." He nodded slowly, accepting the critique without defense. It was the truth. "I won't make that mistake again, ma'am." "I know you won't," she said. She finished her coffee and handed the empty mug back to him. Her work here was done. The report she would file would be a complex analysis of the FOB's operational readiness, its leadership, its vulnerabilities. But it would also tell the story of a platoon sergeant who, when faced with the undeniable truth of his own failure, had the strength of character to salute it. "Keep your men safe, Sergeant," she said. It was an order, but it was also a benediction. She turned and walked away, her boots leaving a neat, straight line of prints in the fresh snow. Thorne watched her go, the small, quiet woman who was more of a commander than anyone he had ever known. He looked at the mountain peaks, etched sharp and clear against the morning sky, and felt the same sense of profound, humbling awe.